Spiritually awake people don't do these anymore. Carl Jung knew why. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." In today's world, being spiritually awake isn't just about what you add to your life. It's also about what you stop doing. The path of awakening calls us to release old habits, distractions, and energies that no longer serve our growth. As you listen to these insights, think about your own journey. Which of these patterns have you already let go of? And which are you still holding on to? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how these principles are shaping your daily life. Welcome to Spiritual Wisdom, where together we explore the truth that can transform both our happiness and our destiny. 1. Spiritual awakening is a shedding, not an adding. Spiritual awakening is not a process of adding more to your identity, but of peeling away what was never real to begin with. The patterns, masks, and expectations that once seemed necessary gradually feel heavy, suffocating, and false. Carl Jung reminded us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And this wisdom points to the essence of awakening. It is not about creating a new self, but about uncovering the authentic one that has always been waiting beneath the surface. As you awaken, you begin to notice how many of your choices were guided by the need to fit in, to please, or to survive. What once felt intelligent for protection, shaping yourself to meet the demands of others, seeking validation, hiding your true feelings, now feels like betrayal of the soul. These patterns do not disappear overnight, and you do not force yourself to stop them. They fall away naturally, like old skin that no longer fits. Just as a snake quietly sheds what it has outgrown, so too do you release behaviors that cannot contain the new life rising within you. Jung observed in countless individuals that transformation rarely arrives in a dramatic burst, but in a quiet, consistent unfolding. Genuine spiritual wisdom reveals itself as a slow release rather than a sudden performance. The unconscious begins to rise into awareness, and in that awareness, the old habits lose their grip. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, Jung said. An awakening is precisely this: the shift from being ruled by invisible patterns to consciously stepping into truth. As this process deepens, you may find yourself unwilling to engage in shallow conversations, drama, or the endless cycle of seeking approval. These are not acts of arrogance or rejection. They are signs that your inner self is finally strong enough to no longer feed what drains you. Instead of grasping at validation, you begin to rest in confidence. Instead of pleasing everyone, you grow into authentic compassion. Instead of hiding behind masks, you show up as a presence. What falls away is not a loss, but a revelation. In surrendering the false, you allow the true to shine. The intelligence of the soul does not demand that you become more. It invites you to become less conditioned, less masked, less fragmented, so that you can return to the essence of who you really are. The journey is not about collapse, but about unfolding. Not about striving harder, but about surrendering deeper. With each layer released, the light of authenticity grows stronger. And in that light, you recognize that awakening was never about becoming someone new. It was always about remembering who you have been all along. Comment below: I release what no longer serves me. If you're ready to embrace the true shedding of spiritual awakening. 2. They quit seeking approval. When spiritual awakening deepens, something inside you shifts so profoundly that the old hunger for approval becomes unbearable, because the soul recognizes it as a false currency. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And when this realization dawns, you begin to see how much of your life was lived through masks designed to please others. Approval seeking, once a habit that felt necessary for survival, suddenly feels like self-betrayal, because every time you mold yourself for recognition, you are trading authenticity for applause. In the noise of modern life, where likes, shares, and comments are used as proof of worth, this lesson becomes even sharper. Spirituality teaches that no amount of external validation can replace the deep, unshakable sense of value that comes from within. The awakening self begins to see how chasing approval drains energy and fragments identity. You may notice how often people sacrifice their truth to be liked, posting what they don't believe in, saying yes when their soul whispers no, or bending dreams to fit into the narrow boxes of expectation. Yet when spirituality takes root, you feel an inner resistance rising against these patterns, a refusal to keep abandoning yourself. Jung described this process as individuation, the journey of becoming whole, and in this wholeness, you no longer crave the fleeting nods of recognition because they pale in comparison to the peace of living aligned with your essence. Authenticity, once frightening, becomes irresistible, and the desire to be validated by the crowd fades, replaced by a deeper commitment to your own soul's voice. This shift is not about arrogance or indifference. It is about liberation. When you stop living for approval, you stop being controlled by it, and suddenly, the opinions of others lose their power to define you. In today's culture of comparison, where identity is often measured in numbers, spiritual awakening reminds you that the metrics of the soul cannot be counted. Inner worth is timeless and cannot be given or taken away. To accept yourself fully, shadows and all, is, as Jung wrote, the most terrifying thing, but it is also the most freeing. You begin to understand that those who truly resonate with your energy will recognize you without you needing to prove anything, because authenticity is magnetic in a way performance never could be. The wisdom here is simple but profound. Stop begging for approval and start embodying your worth. In modern life, this might mean saying no to a toxic relationship that only survives through your constant pleasing, walking away from a career path that drains your spirit just to look respectable, or silencing the urge to post for validation and instead sharing from genuine inspiration. Spirituality does not erase your longing for connection, it transforms it. You no longer want attention from everyone. You want resonance with the right ones. And paradoxically, it is when you release the chase for validation that you attract genuine love, respect, and alignment. Not because you demanded it, but because truth naturally draws what belongs to it. That is the intelligence of spiritual wisdom Carl Jung uncovered. The spiritually awake no longer seek approval because they have already found something far greater than their authentic self. 3. They quit needing to be special. At the beginning of awakening, many people experience what Carl Jung described as spiritual inflation, a sense of being chosen, superior, or somehow above the rest. It feels like stepping into a hidden truth that others cannot yet see. And for a time, The ego clings to this sensation of specialness. But as spiritual development matures, this illusion begins to dissolve. True spirituality is never about standing on a pedestal or demanding recognition. It is about embodying authenticity without the craving for applause. The spiritually awakened discover that the desire to be seen as unique is nothing more than another mask, another performance for the outside world. And they realize that real growth lies in quietly living their truth. Jung observed that genuine maturity in spirituality is not expressed by claiming, "I am awakened," but by a deep humility that grows naturally when the ego's need for superiority fades away. Instead of trying to prove their uniqueness, spiritually awake people embody it effortlessly, like a river that does not announce its flow, yet sustains life all around it. The more they release the pressure to perform, the more their presence speaks louder than any declaration. This shift is not about shrinking who you are, but about allowing your individuality to shine without effort or competition. Jung understood that the ego, with its constant need to compare and elevate itself, is often the greatest barrier to consciousness. And so, when that need begins to fall away, what remains is something far more radiant: authenticity that cannot be manufactured, a quiet light that others naturally feel and are drawn to without explanation. In our modern world, dominated by social media and constant validation seeking, this lesson holds deep relevance. Everywhere you turn, you are encouraged to perform, to curate your identity, to measure your value by numbers, to shout louder to be noticed. But awakening pulls you in the opposite direction. It asks you to pause and ask, am I expressing my truth, or am I chasing approval? Spiritual development teaches you that real worth is not tied to recognition, but to the quiet alignment of your life with your inner essence. When you no longer depend on attention to confirm your value, you step into freedom. You begin to understand that the divine spark within does not compete. It simply exists, complete and whole in itself. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This is the essence of awakening, not to be special compared to others, but to be whole within yourself. The spiritually awake no longer waste energy on proving their importance, because they have discovered that worthiness has always been their birthright. They do not ask the world to recognize them. They simply live in the flow of their truth, with quiet confidence and steady peace. The deeper message here is simple yet transformative. Spirituality invites you to release the burden of superiority and to rest in your authentic being. The more you let go of the need to be special, the more extraordinary life becomes, not through performance or comparison, but through the silent power of presence and the wisdom of simply being. If you're ready to release the need to be special and simply live in your authentic truth, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and share your reflections in the comments below. Let's grow together on this path. 4. They quit performing happiness. Spiritually awake people no longer perform happiness because they have learned that real spiritual wisdom is not about maintaining an image of endless positivity, but about embracing the full depth of human experience. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that truth means accepting both light and shadow, both joy and sorrow. Pretending to always be fine only creates a mask that suffocates the soul. while allowing yourself to be real opens the door to true freedom and intelligence in your spiritual journey. When you stop performing happiness, you release the exhausting need to convince others that everything is perfect. Instead, you begin to honor your feelings honestly, whether they are grief, doubt, or fear. And this honesty becomes the foundation of your strength. Jung reminded us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In this way, you no longer deny the parts of yourself that are hurting. You invite them into awareness where they can be healed. Just like the sky holds both day and night, your soul carries both light and shadow, and both are equally essential to your growth. This shift also frees you from the trap of external validation. When you stop needing to perform for others' approval, you step out of the prison of appearances and into the authenticity of your own truth. It takes courage to admit, today I am not okay. But that very courage is what makes you strong and deeply human. People can sense when you are real, and it draws them closer, because authenticity carries a magnetic power that pretense never can. Spiritual maturity is not measured by how cheerful you appear, but by how whole you allow yourself to be. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Performing happiness only keeps your unconscious locked away, while authenticity sets you free. By allowing yourself to rest when you are weary, to cry when you need release, and to celebrate joy when it truly flows, you honor your humanity and embody spiritual wisdom. So, the journey of awakening is not about forced positivity, but about living truthfully, with intelligence, honesty, and courage. When you stop acting happy and start being real, you step into the deeper freedom of becoming your whole self. And that is where the essence of true awakening lives. 5. They quit needing certainty. Carl Jung once reminded us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And in this truth lies the realization that certainty, though it may feel safe, becomes a cage that locks the soul away from true growth. Spiritual awakening reveals that clinging to absolute answers is not wisdom, but fear disguised as control. And the moment you begin to release the obsession with knowing everything is the moment you step into the deeper intelligence of spiritual wisdom. Life was never meant to be lived like a formula where every step is predicted. Instead, it was meant to unfold like a mystery, guiding you through paradoxes and unanswered questions that expand your spirit rather than confine it. In modern life, certainty is worshipped. People chase financial guarantees, fixed outcomes in relationships, and rigid belief systems. But awakening makes you see that certainty itself is an illusion, fragile and temporary, while openness to not knowing creates a strength that cannot be shaken. The awakened soul learns to sit comfortably with paradox, understanding that questions themselves are a sacred teacher. As Rainer Maria Rilke beautifully wrote, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. Because in loving the questions, you stop demanding the universe to hand you guarantees and instead begin to trust the unfolding of life. Spirituality teaches you that wisdom is not a static possession, but a living dialogue between your conscious choices and your unconscious depths, between reason and intuition. This is why awakened people slowly let go of their hunger for certainty. They begin to trust their inner compass, knowing that every choice, whether it feels right or wrong, carries a necessary lesson. In practice, this looks like releasing the pressure to define every relationship with labels, choosing to trust in timing instead of forcing outcomes, or allowing your beliefs to evolve instead of holding on to them out of fear. Letting go of certainty does not mean you drift without direction. It means you live with trust rather than control. When you no longer demand guarantees, you create space for synchronicity, for intuition, and for possibilities your logical mind could never predict. Life becomes an unfolding journey rather than a rigid map. And this shift brings a peace far deeper than the brittle comfort of control. Jung observed that true spirituality is not about clinging, but about releasing. Not about answers, but about presence. And the privilege of becoming who you are lies in this surrender. When you stop needing certainty, you find yourself open to wisdom that grows slowly, like light filtering through cracks in the darkness, guiding you not toward guarantees, but toward authenticity. In this way, spirituality transforms fear of the unknown into reverence for mystery, showing you that the unknown itself is not a threat, but a sacred invitation into the fullness of life. Are you ready to release the need for certainty and step fully into trust? If so, comment below. I embrace uncertainty, to affirm your commitment to this path of spiritual awakening. 6. They quit blame. Spiritually awake people quit blame because they realize that carrying it only prolongs suffering and prevents true freedom. Blame keeps you trapped in a story of victimhood, where the past dictates your present and shapes your future. But spirituality teaches that liberation begins when you reclaim your power. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this truth reveals why the spiritually developed refuse to remain in cycles of accusation. They see that while harm and injustice may have shaped their journey, constantly pointing fingers does not bring healing. Instead, they take ownership of their growth, not by denying pain, but by transforming it into wisdom, strength, and clarity. When you quit blame, you begin to see patterns that were once hidden and recognize your role in how you respond to life. This is not about excusing wrongs or ignoring wounds, but about choosing not to surrender your power to the people or events that once hurt you. Rather than replaying the same painful narratives, you redirect energy towards self-discovery and transformation. Spirituality becomes practical. Instead of blaming a workplace for your misery, you choose to set boundaries or create new opportunities. Instead of blaming a broken relationship, you learn its lessons and enter new connections with a wiser heart. Instead of blaming the world for being unfair, you build resilience and discover the strength to shape a more meaningful path. Carl Jung observed that real spiritual development is not achieved through sudden, dramatic change, but through gradual releasing, a slow but steady shedding of the old skin that no longer fits. Blame is one of the first things to fall away because it suffocates the soul. Each time you refuse to indulge in blame and instead turn inward, you open the door to growth. Slowly, you experience a quiet yet profound liberation where peace no longer depends on external circumstances, but on your inner state. This inner strength allows you to respond rather than react, to rise above chaos rather than be swallowed by it. The spiritually awake know that freedom is never found in controlling others, but in mastering themselves. They have learned that every experience can be a teacher, every disappointment can spark resilience, and every wound can refine the spirit. The deeper the pain, the greater the opportunity for awakening. And so, they stop wasting energy on blame because they understand it is a chain that ties them to what they wish to escape. In letting go, they reclaim not only their power, but also their joy, their clarity, and their sense of purpose. To walk this path is to see that blame serves no one. It is ownership, responsibility, and conscious evolution that transform the soul and lead to the true liberation that every seeker of spirituality longs to experience. 7. They quit spiritual bypassing. They quit spiritual bypassing because they realize that spirituality is not about escaping pain or hiding behind illusions of light, but about embracing the full spectrum of life. Instead of pretending that suffering doesn't exist, they allow themselves to feel it, to sit with it, and to learn from it. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And those words remind us that true awakening demands facing what hurts rather than denying it. Spiritually awake people understand that bypassing only creates a fragile mask, while courageously engaging with their wounds brings lasting transformation. When they stop bypassing, they no longer use positive slogans or spiritual cliches to cover their struggles. They don't hide grief under the phrase, "everything happens for a reason," nor do they dismiss sadness as weakness or anger as low vibration. Instead, they see these emotions as messengers pointing to deeper truths within. They begin to embody a balanced intelligence where spiritual wisdom meets human honesty. They live with one foot in heaven and one foot on earth, fully present in relationships, work, joy, and pain. In this presence, they find that emotions are not enemies to conquer, but signals to integrate. Carl Jung often spoke about the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we would rather not face. Spiritually awake people no longer pretend that the shadow doesn't exist. They recognize that ignoring it only feeds it, while acknowledging it brings real freedom. By daring to look at their anger, their fear, and their shame, they reclaim their wholeness. What was once repressed becomes transformed into strength. This is why Jung observed that there is no coming to consciousness without pain, because pain, when faced, becomes a doorway into deeper awareness. As they release the urge to bypass, their compassion also expands. They no longer use spirituality as a way to feel superior, but as a bridge of connection with others. They stop judging those who struggle because they know how much courage it takes to face wounds honestly. Their laughter becomes healing. Their tears become sacred, and their scars become wisdom. Instead of trying to transcend their humanity, they honor it, knowing that divinity is found not in escape, but in embodiment. This shift marks the true maturity of awakening, no longer chasing illusions of constant bliss, but embracing the raw truth of life. To quit spiritual bypassing is to accept that every shadow carries a lesson and every wound carries wisdom. It is to live awake, to live whole, and to live free. If this message resonates with you, share your thoughts below. Not sure what to say? Simply comment, "I see clearly," so I'll know you made it to the end. 8. They quit isolation. Awakening often begins with solitude. because in the early stages, you feel the need to step away from the world, to listen to your inner voice, and to protect your energy from distractions. This retreat is not weakness, but a necessary pause, a time to strip away illusions and face the truth within. Yet as your spirituality matures, isolation no longer feels like a sanctuary. It begins to feel like a cage. The awakened spirit understands that growth cannot remain locked away in silence, because true transformation leads you back into conscious connection with others. Carl Jung observed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And this reflects the essence of spiritual awakening. The return to relationships that refine, expand, and deepen your being. Instead of superiority or self-erasure, you learn to form relationships rooted in authenticity. You no longer approach people with masks, roles, or the need to impress. You show up as yourself, unhidden and unafraid. The intimacy you create is not about merging into another or controlling them, but about allowing two whole beings to stand together with presence and respect. In a modern world where loneliness has quietly become one of the greatest epidemics, this shift is powerful. Many people scroll endlessly, surrounded by digital noise, yet remain unseen and unheard. Spiritual awakening reveals that shallow approval and empty validation cannot feed the soul. You crave depth, truth, and communities that honor presence over performance. This new way of connection changes how you live every day. When you are with someone, you are not distracted, rehearsing your next words, or glancing at your phone. You are fully there, listening not only with your ears, but with your spirit. Presence becomes your gift, and it creates bonds that are both intimate and liberating. In this way, relationships stop being a stage for ego battles or codependency, and instead become a sacred ground where two souls can grow side by side. Solitude still has its place as a moment of reflection, but you no longer mistake isolation for enlightenment. The path of spiritual awakening leads you into the world with a new heart, one that seeks connection without fear, superiority, or dependence, and one that turns ordinary encounters into transformative experiences of genuine intimacy. 9. The deeper truth. Quitting is liberation. The deeper truth is that quitting is liberation, because every act of release opens the doorway to authenticity, freedom, and spiritual development. When you stop living for approval, you no longer measure your value by the reactions of others, but by the quiet strength of your own soul. Letting go of the need to feel special frees you from endless comparison, and you begin to recognize that your worth has never depended on standing above anyone else. It has always been intrinsic. Dropping the exhausting performance of roles and masks allows you to breathe more deeply, to live more honestly, and to rest in the peace of simply being. Releasing the obsession with certainty teaches you to trust life's unfolding, to lean into mystery, and to understand that true spirituality is not found in rigid answers, but in walking faithfully through the unknown. Each release of approval, specialness, performance, certainty, blame, bypassing, and isolation creates sacred space within you for authenticity, inner power, wisdom, embodiment, and meaningful connection. Carl Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Spirituality, then, is not about building a new identity, but about peeling away every false layer until the self that has always been true emerges. This is a slow death and rebirth of identity, a cycle where the illusions you once clung to dissolve, and what remains is the essence of your being. Just as autumn leaves fall, not as a sign of death, but as preparation for renewal, so too does the soul let go of what no longer serves, so it can be reborn into clarity and strength. Spiritually awake people no longer cling to blame, because blame anchors them to the past and keeps wounds alive. They no longer bypass pain with shallow positivity, because they understand that healing requires facing the shadow with honesty and courage. They no longer isolate themselves, because awakening reveals that separation is an illusion, and that compassion and connection are the lifeblood of the human spirit. In a modern world saturated with noise, pressure, and competition, these acts of release become revolutionary. Every time you surrender an old pattern, you reclaim your wholeness. Every time you refuse to play society's empty games, you align more deeply with your authentic power. And every time you release control, you discover the peace that arises when you allow life to flow through you. The message is clear. Spiritual development is not about adding more layers to who you think you should be, but about stripping away illusions, lies, and expectations until only truth remains. To walk this path is to understand that your strength lies not in accumulation, but in release. Not in proving, but in presence. Not in striving to become someone else, but in remembering who you already are at your core. And so, the journey of the spiritually awake is not defined by what they add, but by what they've learned to let go of. The wisdom of Carl Jung reminds us that true awakening is a process of release, refinement, and deep inner clarity. If today's message from Spiritual Wisdom has inspired you, I invite you to carry these insights into your daily life and notice how they transform you from within. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the powerful content we have coming your way. At 60, everything changes spiritually. Carl Jung once said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning." At 60, life takes on a new spiritual dimension, one that calls us to reflect, release, and rise into deeper wisdom. This is not the end of vitality, but the awakening of a richer chapter where spirituality becomes our greatest guide. In this video on Spiritual Wisdom, we'll explore why everything changes spiritually at 60 and how embracing these truths can bring peace, growth, and happiness. What about you? Have you noticed how aging has shifted your inner perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experience. 1. The hidden curve of life at 60. Around the age of 60, something quiet but extraordinary begins to unfold within the human spirit. Outwardly, life may appear steady, familiar, even ordinary. The body slows a little. The pace of days feels calmer, and emotions soften into simplicity. Yet inside, a subtle axis turns. The soul begins to reorient itself, no longer clinging to the urgency of ambition or the constant desire to prove its worth. What once mattered, the applause, the titles, the endless race for achievement, starts to lose its hold. Instead, the soul leans inward, seeking the forgotten essence, the hidden treasures of meaning that were overlooked in the first half of life. Carl Jung captured this truth when he wrote, "The afternoon of life must also have a significance of its own and cannot be merely a pitiful appendage to life's morning." At 60, you are stepping into that afternoon. And this transition is not just natural, it is deeply spiritual. This hidden curve does not arrive with drama, but with whispers. It gently erases the illusion that survival and recognition are the ultimate goals. You may notice yourself no longer needing to please others, no longer desperate to fit into roles designed by society. The very hunger that once drove you forward now transforms into a different kind of intelligence, an intelligence rooted in spiritual wisdom, reflection, and truth. Jung explained that the first half of life is about gathering possessions, shaping identity, securing place and purpose in the outer world. Yet the second half of life demands something else. It calls for integration, for balance, for the courage to turn inward. As he said, "What was great in the morning will be little in the evening, and what in the morning was true will in the evening have become a lie." This is not decline, it is awakening. The shift at 60 is not about giving up, but about tuning in. It is an invitation to see life from a higher vantage point, to measure your days not by productivity, but by presence. It is the season when wisdom outweighs ambition, when authenticity matters more than approval, and when the intelligence of the heart surpasses the cleverness of the mind. You are not retreating from the world. You are rediscovering your place within it. In this sacred transition, you realize that the true journey was never about chasing recognition, but about uncovering the wholeness already within you. And so, at 60, everything changes spiritually, because life itself redirects you toward what is eternal. Old ambitions dissolve, leaving space for clarity. The need to impress fades, revealing the desire to connect. What emerges is a deeper hunger, not for more achievements, but for truth, love, and alignment with the soul. This is where Carl Jung's intelligence and spiritual wisdom guide us. The recognition that the curve of life bends not toward endings, but toward awakening. To embrace this curve is to discover that the second half of life is not smaller, but infinitely greater. For it is here that the soul finally remembers itself. Have you ever noticed that hidden curve of life around 60, when everything begins to shift spiritually? If you've experienced this transformation, share your story in the comments so others can learn from it. If not, comment, "I will discover," to open yourself to this deeper journey of awakening. 2. From ego to soul. The first half of life is a long construction project, building the ego brick by brick. But as Carl Jung explained, the second half belongs to the soul. By the time a person reaches 60, the structures of identity, ambition, and approval begin to crumble under their own weight. The masks that once served us no longer fit. The pretenses we once carried feel heavy. And what rises in their place is a soul that demands authenticity. Many interpret the deep fatigue that appears at this stage as depression, but Jung called it clarity, because the soul is no longer willing to waste energy on illusions. What feels like an ending is actually a beginning, a turning inward where spiritual awakening reveals itself as the deeper purpose of the years ahead. In earlier decades, the ego thrived on proving itself, chasing recognition, building careers, accumulating titles, and striving to meet the endless expectations of others. Yet by 60, that urgency fades, and the desire to impress dissolves. replaced by a quiet recognition that none of these things truly define who we are. This is the subtle but powerful shift from ego to soul, a redirection of energy from the external world of validation to the internal world of truth. Though it can feel unsettling, even disorienting, this discomfort is not decay, but transformation, not decline, but liberation. Jung reminded us that the afternoon of life cannot be lived by the rules of its morning, and this wisdom is a call to embrace a new dimension of spirituality where meaning is no longer borrowed from others, but drawn from the depths of our own being. In modern life, the signs of this shift are everywhere. People at 60 begin to ask different questions. What truly matters? What brings peace? What is worth my time and energy now? The endless pursuit of possessions and status often gives way to simplicity, presence, and depth. Many discover the freedom to finally say no without guilt, to rest without shame, and to choose relationships, creativity, and inner peace over ambition. This is not the loss of drive, but the discovery of a higher drive, the drive to live aligned with the soul rather than ego. Spirituality emerges here not as an abstract concept, but as lived wisdom, guiding choices that honor authenticity, clarity, and peace. The very fatigue that once seemed like a burden becomes the proof of growth, a sign that the soul refuses to settle for the noise of the world when truth is calling from within. The journey from ego to soul does not erase the first half of life, but redeems it. Every challenge, every success, and every failure becomes raw material for transformation. Jung emphasized that wholeness, not perfection, is the true goal of maturity. And this stage of life invites us to gather all parts of ourselves into a deeper harmony. Shadows are not denied, strengths are not exaggerated, and wisdom is not borrowed but lived. At 60, spirituality is no longer an option. It becomes the compass. The soul no longer negotiates with masks or distractions. It insists on truth, and it insists on peace. What the world calls slowing down is in reality a sacred acceleration into meaning, clarity, and authenticity, where the light of wisdom finally outshines the demands of ego. 3. Integration of the past. At 60, life no longer demands that you chase after titles, cars, or recognition, because the focus shifts inward where the soul longs for something far greater: peace, silence, forgiveness, and the courage to face yourself without masks. This stage is not about regret, but about integration, a deep process of revisiting marriages, relationships, choices, and wounds, not to judge them, but to weave them into a meaningful whole. Every memory, whether joyful or painful, becomes part of the fabric of who you are, and spirituality begins to guide you away from ambition toward wholeness. The desire to impress others fades, and what rises in its place is the longing to heal, to forgive, and to rest in the truth of your own being. As you look back, you realize the past is not something to escape, but something to embrace. For every mistake has shaped your strength, every wound has opened a doorway to wisdom, and every broken dream has redirected you toward deeper truths. Old choices no longer carry the same weight of guilt or shame. Instead, they shine as teachers that refined your soul. Relationships once clouded with pain can now be seen through clearer eyes, revealing not only loss, but lessons that deepened your understanding of love and humanity. Integration allows you to gather these fragments and bring them home to the heart so that no part of your journey is wasted. Spiritual development at 60 teaches that forgiveness is no longer optional, but essential. for without it, the soul remains divided. To forgive yourself is to free yourself, and to forgive others is to release the chains that bind both heart and memory. This is not weakness, but strength. The kind of strength that makes silence more powerful than words and stillness more healing than constant striving. In a world that glorifies youth and success, this stage whispers a liberating truth. Happiness is not found in what you achieve, but in what you accept, not in how much you acquire, but in how fully you embrace the life you have lived. Carl Jung reminded us that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. At 60, this wisdom becomes alive, teaching that both light and shadow must be embraced if you are to be whole. You no longer need to hide your scars, for they are part of your story, nor deny your failures, for they shaped your courage. Spirituality at this stage is about authenticity, living without pretense, walking without fear, and finding beauty in the truth of your own existence. In this sacred space of integration, you come to see that your past was never a burden, but a teacher leading you to the wholeness your soul has always longed for. Comment below. I honor my past and embrace my growth. If you are ready to integrate your life's journey and step into this new chapter of spiritual awakening. 4. Awakening of the inner self. At 60, life takes on a deeper rhythm, and what once appeared to be an ending reveals itself as a new beginning. The body may slow, the days may appear quieter, but inside the soul turns toward its truest essence. Carl Jung wisely said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning." And it is here, in this sacred turning point, that the inner awakening begins. The need to prove yourself fades. The urge to compete loses its fire, and the fear of judgment weakens. You realize that the masks you wore and the roles you played no longer serve you, and the soul longs to be authentic, to live in alignment with its purest form. This transformation is not dramatic or sudden, but a quiet shift, like a compass slowly pointing you back to yourself. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. And at 60, it arrives with clarity. No longer driven by endless ambition or the expectations of others, you begin to understand that true fulfillment lies not in accumulation, but in release. Spiritual wisdom unfolds like a hidden map, reminding you that the soul does not age. It only deepens, expands, and returns to the essence it has always carried. What once defined success numbers, recognition, approval, becomes less important. Instead, the measure of a life well lived is found in presence, in depth, in authenticity. Jung's words echo powerfully here. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. At 60, this awakening is unavoidable. You no longer chase the illusion of more. You savor the gift of what is. Every day becomes sacred, not because of how much it holds, but because of how fully you inhabit it. This is not retreat, but expansion. Aging is not decline, but refinement. The ego loosens its grip, and the soul rises in serenity. You forgive more easily, love more deeply, and allow your very presence to carry meaning. Life becomes about quality rather than quantity, truth rather than performance. In this stage, you see that the greatest treasures are not in what you own, but in who you become. At 60, you are not moving toward the end. You are awakening into wholeness, into freedom, into the timeless essence of the soul. 5. Embracing the shadow and forgotten parts. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." At 60, this truth becomes more visible than ever because life begins to shift away from external pursuits and toward the forgotten parts of the soul. The reintegration of the shadow of those suppressed feelings, silenced intuitions, and neglected dreams emerges as an essential task. These hidden aspects, once pushed aside to meet society's demands, now resurface as possibilities, urging you toward study, creativity, or healing. The soul no longer obeys the world's clock, but instead listens to an inner call that cannot be ignored. This stage of life often reveals itself through subtle changes. The drive to impress others weakens, the need to prove oneself dissolves, and ambitions that once felt urgent lose their weight. What appears on the surface as slowing down is, in truth, a spiritual awakening, a reorientation of energy from outer striving to inner fulfillment. Spirituality at this point is no longer about belief alone, but about living with authenticity, guided by the intelligence of the spirit rather than the noise of external validation. Jung warned that when these whispers of the shadow are ignored, the result is stagnation, but when embraced, they become the seeds of renewal, creativity, and peace. Modern life can make this transition difficult, as it praises productivity and constant motion. Yet many people at 60 feel an undeniable shift. The corporate title or social status that once defined worth suddenly feels hollow compared to the joy of painting, writing, gardening, or mentoring. What might seem like a mere hobby is often the soul reclaiming the passions and callings that were sacrificed long ago. This is not regression, but completing the second half of life, asking for wholeness rather than ambition. It is the moment when spirituality moves from concept to lived experience, as the shadow reveals itself not as an enemy, but as a guide. These signals often arrive quietly. A restlessness when repeating old routines, a spark of joy when reconnecting with neglected passions, or a sense of clarity when sitting in silence, all point to the same truth. The soul is no longer content with artificial measures of success. It seeks alignment with timeless wisdom, urging you to step into authenticity. This inner voice may call you to forgive yourself for years of suppression, to create space for reflection, or to pursue a passion that once seemed impossible. To honor that voice is to allow the shadow to turn into light, to let spiritual awakening unfold as a natural part of life's design. At 60, the message is clear. You are not ending, but transforming. The journey shifts from chasing achievements to embracing wholeness, from proving yourself to finally living in truth. Spiritual wisdom teaches that the soul's intelligence knows when it is time to turn inward. And when you follow that call, you discover freedom beyond the limits of time, a peace that ambition could never provide, and a deeper awakening that carries you into the most authentic chapter of your life. 6. Freedom, beauty, and spiritual maturity. At 60, life begins to whisper a different song, one that invites you into a deeper state of spirituality and spiritual development. And this transformation often feels like a gentle unveiling of your truest self. Freedom becomes the essence of your days. You no longer feel the need to apologize for your choices, justify your existence, or chase validation from others. After decades of carrying roles, responsibilities, and silent burdens, you suddenly step into a new kind of liberation, one that is not about breaking rules, but about honoring your soul. This freedom is graceful, quiet, and powerful, and it is here that you finally realize your worth has never depended on the approval of the outside world, but has always resided within your authentic presence. True beauty begins to radiate in ways that no mirror could ever fully capture. It is no longer the fleeting charm of youthful appearance, but the lasting glow of wisdom, serenity, and depth. Beauty at this stage flows from the strength of your character, the gentleness of your spirit, and the calm authority of your lived experiences. It unsettles those who are still chasing surface illusions, because your authenticity reflects back to them what they have not yet dared to embrace. Carl Jung once reminded us that the privilege of a life 7. Individuation and spiritual depth. At 60, individuation deepens in a way that feels less like striving and more like surrendering into your true self. You begin to reconcile with the wounds of your past, to forgive yourself and others, and to embrace both light and shadow as necessary parts of wholeness. The scars that once seemed like burdens now reveal themselves as marks of strength, proof that you have endured and transformed. Forgiveness loosens the chains of regret and resentment, and in that release, you reclaim energy that had been trapped for decades. Life no longer demands perfection. It calls for authenticity, for the courage to live honestly with all that you are. Spirituality at 60 is not a doctrine to memorize, but a lived experience that flows through presence, awareness, and peace. The frantic rush of earlier years softens, and time itself changes, meaning it is no longer measured by how fast you can move, but by how deeply you can dwell in each moment. Fear, which once ruled so many decisions, begins to fade like a shadow at dawn, and wisdom rises quietly in its place. This wisdom is not loud or demanding. It radiates naturally, like light breaking through the clouds. Carl Jung reminded us that knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. At 60, you embody this truth, carrying both gentleness and strength, becoming more compassionate, less reactive, and more at peace with life's contradictions. Intelligence at this stage is no longer about accumulation of facts or achievements. It becomes spiritual wisdom, a higher form of intelligence that integrates experience, failure, and joy into a deeper understanding of what it means to live. You realize the journey was never about competing or proving, but about awakening. Instead of constantly doing, you discover the freedom of simply being. It is not retirement from life, but a graduation into a richer way of living, where reflection holds more value than performance and authenticity outweighs ambition. In a world that idolizes speed and productivity, reaching 60 offers a sacred counterpoint. The realization that true richness is found not in endless activity, but in presence. By embracing both your strengths and vulnerabilities, you embody a spiritual awakening that quietly blesses everyone around you. You no longer inspire by striving, but by existing fully as yourself. Jung's words echo here. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. At 60, awakening is no longer an idea you chase. It becomes your lived reality, a quiet and luminous truth that turns ordinary days into moments of timeless depth. 8. Living in truth and wholeness. At this stage of life, the soul whispers more clearly, and the old demands of perfectionism, control, and rigid roles begin to lose their grip. The endless striving to meet expectations or prove worth feels unnecessary, as authenticity becomes the true measure of living. In this shift, the heart opens to creativity, not as a performance, but as a natural expression of being painting, writing, tending to the garden, or simply watching the sunrise becomes a spiritual practice. Solitude, once feared as emptiness, transforms into a sanctuary of freedom where the soul feels most alive and connected. Relationships evolve as well, no longer based on convenience or shallow approval, but on depth, nourishment, and resonance. People who cannot meet you in this space may fade away, while those who remain reflect your truest self back to you. The bonds you now cherish are the ones that honor presence, compassion, and genuine connection. This transition mirrors Jung's insight that the second half of life is not about climbing higher, but about descending inward, where the ego bows to the soul. The surrender of ego is not a defeat, but a victory of wisdom, a recognition that peace comes not from achievement, but from essence. In modern life, where noise, performance, and validation dominate, this transformation is radical. To step out of the race and into authenticity is to reclaim your energy and joy. Spiritual awakening here means choosing simplicity over complexity, presence over distraction, and truth over pretense. It is saying yes to what nourishes you and gently letting go of what no longer serves. Perfectionism is answered with the quiet knowledge that you are already whole, and the urge to control is softened by trust in life's unfolding. Living in truth and wholeness means discovering that freedom is not found in having more, but in being more. It is the gentle courage to live aligned with your soul, to find joy in the ordinary, to savor the silence as deeply as the laughter, and to let each day reflect who you really are without disguise. In this space, life is no longer measured by titles or possessions, but by the depth of presence and the authenticity of being, where the ego steps aside and the soul finally takes its rightful place at the center of existence. And so, as Carl Jung reminds us, reaching 60 is not just a number. It is a doorway to a deeper spiritual awakening, a time when the soul calls us to live with greater wisdom, purpose, and inner peace. If this message has touched your heart, I invite you to reflect on your own journey and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who may need this encouragement, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos filled with insight and inspiration.